Welcome to my React Kanban tutorial. We're going to use create React app and pass in the name of our project, in this case Kanban tutorial. And that's going to install all the dependencies and set a basic React project for us. So once that's set up, we can go ahead and run yarn start. And what that'll do is fire up Webpack, and it looks like something's already running on port 3000, so it switches to port 3001. And once we reload that page over here, we have a React app up and running. So to start with, I'm going to create a constructor and define the initial state. In our initial state, we're going to have an object with a property called columns. It's going to be an array of columns where each column is represented as an object. And that object's going to have a property called name, which is the name of that column, backlog, doing, and done. And then it's going to have a cards property, which is an array of cards. Each card is also going to be represented as an object with a name property. Here's card A. And then we'll go ahead and copy this column object and call that doing, and card B. And we'll add a third column, done, with card C. So that's going to complete the initial state. Now let's go ahead and display that on the screen. Oh, and forgot to call super. So we need to pass in props here and call super props, or the app will explode. And then down here, we'll go ahead and get rid of this header and placeholder, and we're going to do json.stringify and just display that state. And there it is. So the initial state is all set. So let's go ahead and map those columns, this .state.columns.map, and then we're going to get a function that takes in each column and maps it to a React component or a element. So that React component will be a column component, and we're going to pass in the column object itself, and we're going to take in the column index and pass that in as another prop. And we're going to set a key here so the app doesn't complain. And go ahead and format this. I like to put these props one per line, find it a little bit more readable. And after the column is all set up, we're going to get an error, of course, because it's not defined. So let's create that now. We're going to import column from column, and then we're going to go create a new file called column. So I'll go ahead and do that here. Touch column.js, touch card.js, because we're going to have a card component as well. And let's go ahead and open those here so we can run code, and then the file name will open it up for us in the terminal. And I'm going to fire back up yarn start. And then in column, we're going to import React. And we're going to export a default component. It's going to be a stateless functional presentation component. So it's just a function that presents some HTML, and it's going to say I'm a column. And if we go ahead and save that, well, let's see, we got to put it here in the source folder. And it looks like Webpack was not started, so let's go fix that. We'll see I'm a column, I'm a column, I'm a column, because we have 3 column objects in our array in our initial state. So let's go ahead and implement this component. We're going to take in the column object. We're going to put in H1. We're going to render the column.name, column's name. And then below that, we're going to map over the column.cards. I'm going to take in each card and map that to a card component. The card component is going to take in a prop for each card. And we're going to take in the card index here. We're going to pass the card index down to the card component so each card knows its index within the column. I'm going to break these props out one per line for readability. Now I'm going to implement the card component because it doesn't exist yet. So we're going to import card from card, with the relative import here. And then we're going to go create this card component. So we're going to import React, and then we're going to export a default component. It's going to take in the card this time. We're going to map that to a div that says I'm a card. And we see backlog, doing, done, I'm a card, I'm a card, I'm a card. Now let's implement the card. So let's replace I'm a card with card.name. We see card A, card B, card C. It comes from the initial state. We can blow out this CSS here. We don't need it. It just came with create React app. And let's go ahead and give each column a class name of column. And each card will have a class name of column. or sorry, card. And then let's go ahead and create some CSS here. So we're going to say for the card class and for the column class, we're going to have two separate rules. For the app, it's going to say display flex. The column are the children, so they're going to flex in there. And let's put a border on so we can see that. And then if we use flex grow, that'll stretch it out. And then we need a 25 pixel margin. And each card, let's give that some padding as well, kind of give that some room to breathe. And we'll go ahead and give that a border so we can see how that worked. All right, that looks good. Let's format that there. And we'll go ahead and say display flex on the card, and let's go ahead and put these buttons in here as well. So we're going to have a move left. We're going to put that as a string in React so that it doesn't get interpreted as HTML. And so there we got our buttons. And let's go ahead and wrap the title in a span and put flex grow for that span. So I'm going to say span class name title and close that out. And then for that span, for card.span, I'm going to do flex grow. And so that gives the title equal space and pushes the buttons out to the sides. Let's center that. And let's center these titles also. So that's starting to look a little bit better. Now let's get rid of these borders here, or let's get rid of the crazy colors at least. And suppose we could take that border off the card, and that looks a little bit better. Still not great, but better than the crazy colors. Now let's get rid of the left button on the left column. So we're going to create props for can move left and can move right. We're going to say if the column index is not 0, then it can move left. If the column index is not 2, which is the last column, then it can move right. So we got columns 0, 1, and 2. And if the column is 2, we don't want to move right. So in the card component here, we'll go ahead and check those props, can move left and can move right. We'll take them in here and we'll check them. And if they're true, it'll output the button. Can move right, we'll output the right button. And so now we got rid of the left button on the left column and the right button on the right column. Now let's go ahead and implement that. So on click equals move right and on click equals move left, and that should actually be like on move left and on move right. So let's go ahead and rename that here. It's always good to follow some kind of convention between state you're taking in through props and callbacks you're passing down and calling back. So on move left and on move right. And we got to plumb those props through here. A little bit of a code smell where you might want to consider bringing in Redux or using the new context API, but for now we'll just plumb them through. So the column is going to take in on move right and on move left and pass that down to the card. And then here in the app or root component, we'll go ahead and create these on move right and on move left props, and we're going to take in the card index. We're going to call this .handleMove, and we've closed over the column index here, so we can use currying or partial application, and we'll pass in the column index, and then we'll take in the card index, so it's a function that wraps a function, and then we'll create these constants for direction left and direction right. And here in the column, when we call on move left, we need to pass in the card index, of course. So we don't have to pass the column index here because that is curried. It's partially applied here in app.js. So it's a function that we pass in the column index, and then it returns another function where we can call the card index. And then direction left is going to be -1, and direction right we'll go ahead and define. And then we'll implement handle move. And handle move is going to take in the column index and the card index and the direction. Then in handle move, we're going to call this .state.columns and access the column index. So that's going to grab our column. and we're going to call .cards.splice card index, and we're going to take one element from that index. So that's going to return, it's going to splice the card out of that array, out of that subarray, and return the card or an array of that card. Then we're going to call this .state columns, column index plus direction.cards.push card, which was the card we just spliced out of the first subarray. We're going to push it into the new subarray, depending on the direction we're going. And actually want to do set state here, which accepts a function that takes in the previous state and returns the new state. So in here we're going to do previous state.columns, and let's see, here we don't want to do this .state. We want to go ahead and grab the columns off of the previous state. So we'll destructure columns off of previous state, and then we'll splice out of columns and push into columns, and then we're going to return our new state objects with the new columns. So that should be our handle move. And we've got an error here. So what went wrong? Let's go ahead and set a breakpoint here with the debugger statement, and then trigger that, and we can open up our debugger here, and we see I typoed the column index. On direction right, that should be 1, not -1. So if we're going left, we want to move it to the previous column, or -1 on the index, and if we're going right, we want to increase or +1. So let's go ahead and fix that, because we're trying to move to -1 index, which doesn't exist. And now let's see. It seems to move, but we lost our title. So what's happening now? Well, this actually returns an array of cards spliced. So let's destructure that array and just get the individual card, and there we go. So we were pushing superfluous arrays there, but once we destructured the card, pushed the individual card, that fixed the move functionality. So now we need to implement handle add. So we'll go ahead and implement that here. It's going to take in the column index that we're adding to. We're going to prompt with window.prompt and get the name. And then we're going to create a new card object with that name. And we're going to do this.state.columns. Well, actually, we need to do set state here. We're going to push on to the new column index, that card. And if we have a blank name, we're supposed to reject that card. We don't want to allow them to add a blank name. And let's go ahead and add a button here for this move. So we're going to do button on click equals on add card rather. And we're going to just display a little plus sign there. And we need to create a prop for that on add card. And we need to plumb that down, wire that up here in the app. So looks like we got an error here. This on add card should be outside of the map. There we go. So there's our add button, and then we'll go ahead and plumb that around. So on add card equals this dot on add card. And we need to wrap this in an arrow function here and pass in the column index. And that was called handle add. So now if we hit add and put some text in there, it looks like we got an error. So what's going on? We forgot to call set state, so we can't just mutate the state directly, and it was actually column.cards. So fix column.cards. Let's go ahead and wrap this in the this.setState. It's going to take in the previous state and return the new state. So just like we did with handle move and handle add, we're just going to destructure the columns off of the previous state. So we're going to do const columns equals this.state and destructure that here. Then push the card onto the new column and return the new state with the new columns. And let's test this out, add, and it adds. And let's test out move. It moves all the way right and all the way left. So everything seems to be working. Aside from a warning here in the console about a missing key. So we'll go ahead and add that here. and it appears to be we didn't pass it here, and that should fix it.